The thought of driving past a home and just knowing it has to be yours is one that inspires hope and inspiration for your future life. The images conjured of children running through hallways and rooms filled with laughter and love is possibly a feeling that many of us can relate to. In the tranquil embrace of rolling hills and whispering trees, nestled on the edge of a small town, its Victorian facade greeting them with promises of warmth and charm. Reg and Olive wandered through what once were the stately rooms to find just a shell of the possible potential left after years of neglect, and yet stood firm in the belief that with hard work and dedication, they could create the home of their dreams. But as the days passed like leaves in the wind, peculiarities whispered through the halls. Objects shifted when no one was looking, shadows danced in corners where the light dare not tread. At first, they dismissed it as the quirks of an old house finding its voice. Yet whispers grew louder, mirrors reflecting faces long forgotten, their voices heard from empty rooms. Their dream and the plan for a safe haven and sanctuary held secrets that stirred the very foundation of the building they adored. In the hush of twilight, they stood at the heart of their dilemma: to stay and confront the haunting echoes of the past, or to flee and leave behind their dreams. For in the house, where memories clung like cobwebs and shadows lingered as silent witnesses, their commitment faced its greatest test: against the unseen, against the unknown, and against the whispered tales of a home that knew too much. The team at If These Trees Could Talk wish to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Wonnarua Nation. We would like to recognise that we are sharing our stories from the stolen lands of our nation's first storytellers. Our conversations in many ways follow their traditions of storytelling and sharing knowledge and experience. We wish to pay our respects to the Wonnarua elders and ancestors, as well as extend that respect to all First Nations people, including our listeners, and acknowledge and honour their continued connections to the land and waters that have been the inspiration for the stories we share.
We would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people today as the traditional custodians of the land on which this story takes place.
Not everything that appears to be regarded as general knowledge on this family is always as it seems. We have a reported suicide, but quite possible murder. There is very likely going to be a part 2 to this episode because I am still deep in this rabbit hole. Before we start today's episode, I just want to offer a trigger warning.
Again?
Today's episode contains brief conversations in historical context around suicide, the severe neglect and mistreatment of a child, and animal brutality. If this is not for you, we completely understand, and we hope to catch you on the next episode.
You going to make the next one a fun one?
This one still is kind of fun.
Okay.
It's just got a couple of little eeks.
Okay. So a little bit of a paranormal theme today I'm getting.
Well, it was your suggestion, Megan, and it's a sentence that I didn't think I would ever hear come out of your mouth. So last week, Megan suggested, let's do a paranormal episode next week.
Well, just a bit of variety to show people what you're all about.
Megan's a tech girl, and I just don't know. I've just never seen anything spooky about her whatsoever. It's amazing that we can even get along.
I don't even know if that's a compliment or an insult.
We're just the things that our passions are just in the complete opposite realms of existence.
We complement each other.
Yes, that's right. Today, we're heading inside, which I thought was a bit of a betrayal to the whole thing that we're doing here. But when I came up with the name These Trees Could Talk, it was a bit of a play on words, because I can't tell you how many times I've actually stood inside of a building and put my hand on a sandstone wall or run my fingers across timber and thought, oh, if these walls could talk. That same experience happens to me in the forest as well, and different places that I've been. And I'm obviously most comfortable in the forest where it's quiet, sitting by a creek. And they're the things that inspire me and where I gain inspiration from. So as I started researching this and thinking, oh, this is completely an inside story, then I thought about the trees on that property. And once I was deep into the rabbit hole of this, I really thought if they could talk, they could probably give me a lot more answers than I could find anywhere else. Today we are headed to Junee. Junee is a town located in the Riverina region of New South Wales. It is situated approximately 40 kilometres north of Wagga Wagga and about 470 kilometres southwest of Sydney. We visited Junee just as a quick day trip when we were staying at Gundagai on our way to Eildon in Victoria. It was just a quick stopover, like a travel stop. And at the time, the Murrumbidgee River was in flood. So if I had $1 for every time I heard Scott or Jack say, the mighty Murrumbidgee, I'd be quite a rich woman now. But so it was pouring rain. We're in a tiny little cabin and we decided that we'd just go and have a look around, jump in the car and have a look around. I found a flyer, I think it was outside of the toilets, and it had information about Junee Licorice Factory. So we jumped in the car. We thought that'll be great. The kids will love it. And we spent quite a few hours there.
At the licorice shop?
Well, it was a factory. So you got a tour and they made chocolate, and I learnt how they make chocolate shiny. And the different like plant-based products they do. I really should have thought about that more. I didn't think about telling you this, but it was exceptionally interesting. I loved it. And what I thought was going to be like an hour stop ended up being about 4 hours. But I had already watched a lot of videos about the Monte Cristo homestead in Junee. So when I realised that's where we were going, I was like, oh, yes, this is going to be so great. Did some Googling on the way there. Thought, yep, we'll be able to fit in a quick tour. But by the time we were finished at the licorice factory and plying the children with copious amounts of sugar, I didn't think that a 18th century Victorian homestead was probably the right place for 3 kids. And we arrived just after the time that the self-guided tours finished. So we got to have a walk around the outside and have a look, and it was really great to be able to stand in front of that building and take it in after hearing all of the stories. So we are going to learn a little bit more about Monte Cristo Homestead and the families that have lived there today and the spooky encounters that a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, have in this place.
So we have added a new feature. We intend to. So maybe by the time you're listening to this, we will have added a new feature to our website with a virtual tour. So you can actually have a look at a virtual tour of where this homestead is in relation to the rest of Australia. So make sure you, if you need visuals like I do, jump onto the website and have a look at the Google Earth virtual tour.
Before we get into the crux and the guts of this story, there are 2 specific families that we're going to talk about. The Crawley family, who were the people who settled and built Monte Cristo Homestead in Junee, and then we're going to mention the Ryan family, who purchased the home after it had been left abandoned and restored it, and are the people who have had many ghostly encounters within the walls of this beautiful place that they call home. Christopher William Crawley, who was born in 1841, was a farmer who purchased 2 parcels of land in the town of Junee to build his family home. Initially, life was difficult for the Crawley family as they resided in a slab hut and Christopher struggled to feed his family. However, their fortune changed in 1878 with the opening of the Great Southern Railway line. Seizing this opportunity, Crawley gathered all of his resources and acquired a licence to build the railway hotel directly opposite the soon-to-be-open railway station, which was a strategic decision that proved to be very, very wise. At the time, the village of Junee consisted solely of Crawley's hotel and the adjoining railway store, and a few scattered slab huts. So there were people living in the town. I think at that time there might have been like 11 or 12 people. It was just a very, very tiny little settlement. But the arrival of the railway spurred the town's growth and increased travel and trade. As a result, Christopher Crawley became exceptionally wealthy after selling the now thriving railway hotel. Subsequently, he replaced the slab hut with a small brick cottage for his family, converting the old hut site into a large stable for his prized horses. In 1885, while residing in the brick cottage with his wife and I'm going to say 7 children because that's widely reported as how many children he had, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So while he was residing in the brick cottage with his wife and 7 children, Crawley constructed a 2-storey late Victorian-style manor overlooking the town. He retained his homestead until his death on December 14th, 1910, reportedly due to blood poisoning which caused heart failure caused by years of wearing starched collars that irritated his neck. And this is where I'm going to give you a Google image warning. Do not Google what is a carbuncle. That's what they referred to it. I believe now it would be called perhaps an abscess or an ulcer.
You know that's an invitation to Google it.
I know.
I feel like I have to do it right now.
And
stop talking for a second while I Google it.
Just do it because I'd really like to get your reaction.
After last week's, I've actually started bringing my computer in so I can do this properly.
I'd never heard of a carbuncle before.
Well, it wasn't what I was expecting.
I kind of thought it was like a car crash.
An infection of the head.
Don't Google it. Oh, that was worth it. So glad we waited for that. It's not great. It's not great. No. So Christopher obviously had that untreated. And in that time, it was very important when you were a stately important person to wear your nice high collars that were starched and ironed and all of the things that they did to look proper. So you can imagine having something like that on your neck and that rubbing and you probably should
Move on.
Probably should have seen a doctor.
Move on.
Okay. Christopher's wife, Elizabeth Crawley, was born in 1841 and married him on September 22nd, 1862 in Tumut. There were rumours about her being part Indigenous. I have done a lot of research as I've fallen down the rabbit hole of the Crawley family. And through Ancestry and some information that I found online, everything suggested that both of her parents were from England. What I found was that her father was John Carr, a convict who sailed from London to Sydney on the ship Catherine Stewart Forbes, and her mother was Anne Dormer, who married John Carr on October 22nd, 1820 in London, and we did find a marriage certificate for them. Elizabeth was born, I think they had 4 children, and Elizabeth was the youngest, perhaps the second youngest, but she was definitely born after their arrival in Australia. But as we'll discover as we move through today's story, not everything that appears to be regarded as general knowledge on this family is always as it seems, including whose children belong to who or who their parents actually are.
Me not knowing anything about the story that you are telling today, other than a few messages of, oh my gosh, I've uncovered these big secrets that nobody knows about. So just stay tuned for this big breakthrough.
Well, it could be a breakthrough. It could be like, I'm assuming I have watched. Okay, let's have a little side quest here. I have watched as much footage as possible where people have been talking to Reg Ryan, who we will find out in the straight line conversation that I have put together without side quests, that because Reg is obviously a wealth of knowledge, he's the person who restored the home. So I have listened to so many YouTube videos and podcasts with people who had actually met Reg. So I've tried to take the basis from the people who own the property, because they're obviously the people who have done the most research. And Reg was so passionate about this house. So there's some side quests, but again, like, I haven't been inside. I've never spoken to Reg and will never have the opportunity because he has since passed. Olive is still at the homestead, but I'm going way ahead of myself here. So
we've also attached a timeline because if you're anything like me, I find it very hard to...
Shannon can't talk in a straight line. Let's just admit it straight away.
It's not even that. I don't remember numbers. I can't very quickly, like, being able to keep up with, what was happening in the world at that time and how old would these people be now, those sorts of things I find really hard to quickly do in my head. So we have attached a timeline to the website as well.
Yep. So we're going back to Elizabeth and the rumoured fact that she may have had Indigenous heritage, but I couldn't find any evidence of that. But there is also a story that's related to a girl's home and a maid that come to the house, and it's a whole other thing. There is very likely going to be a part 2 to this episode because I am still deep in this rabbit hole.
Okay, so it's a little bit of a case of I think it was one of our other episodes where you're like, I can't know. There are just a few things in this story that don't add up and leave you asking more questions.
But there are people who will know the answers to these questions.
Okay.
And so Mum and I have already talked about it. We're going to Junee. It's happening.
Mm-hmm. So far, this Mum you speak of is If These Trees Could Talk's number one fan.
Number one fan, and we're going to give her credit today as a research assistant because, man, can this woman work Ancestry. She can do things that I have never seen other people be able to do. And while I'm at my regular job, and let's hope that my boss isn't listening to this, we had several phone calls back and forward where she was like, hey, I found out this thing, and then it would line up with something else that I'd heard, and I'd say, yes, that lines up with this, so can you go back and look at this person? And I had to create a document in Canva where I started linking all of the information. It had to be like this living thing that created as we went because we can't talk in a straight line and we needed visual aids.
Thank you, Sue.
She's done a great job. I'm very proud of her. Back to Elizabeth and Christopher. Despite Christopher's well-respected standing in Junee, Elizabeth was known to be harsh and cruel as an employer. Even though they hosted balls and invited other landholders to the homestead for tennis and golf games because they had a tennis court and a golf course on the estate. Yeah. Life's good. But following Christopher's death, Elizabeth spent most of her remaining years in the house. It's reported that she only left 2 times. There is a room off the balcony upstairs which she converted to a chapel. I didn't mention it earlier, but they were both very staunch Roman Catholics, very committed to their religious beliefs, and I believe that Christopher donated a portion of his land to build the church that's still in Junee at the moment, the Catholic Church. So yes, after he passed away, she was distraught and spent most of her time in the homestead in this little chapel that she built off the veranda upstairs where she could look out over the town and just spend her days reading the Bible and contemplating life. And I think she might have been asking for forgiveness for a few things, but we'll get to that bit again.
Spoiler.
Spoiler alert. So Elizabeth lived, I think, for 22 or 29 years after Christopher's death. So quite some time to be on your own, although she just did still have children around and a whole homestead full of staff. But she was 92 when she passed away from a ruptured appendix that caused heart failure. They probably should have employed a doctor at the homestead. I feel like some of these things could have been avoided. But she died on August the 12th, 1933. So there's some maths there that we can do. 22 years. You're the tech person.
I need a timeline.
You need a timeline. We all need a timeline. So in the years following Elizabeth's death, the remaining members of the Crawley household gradually left, and by 1948 the house was abandoned. It remained vacant for over a decade, suffering from vandalism after the removal and sale of its furnishings, despite the efforts of a few caretakers to maintain it. The Ryan family purchased the homestead in 1963 and undertook the meticulous restoration of the homestead, transforming it back to its original state. The historical site now functions as a museum, offering guided tours that includes a dedicated doll museum, an antique store, but I'm not sure about the doll museum anymore. It definitely was there a few years ago, but I'm not 100% sure if that's still there now. There was an antique store, and Reg, who was Olive's husband, was an antiques dealer, a very successful antiques dealer after he had restored the home. Though Reg had passed away in 2014, his wife Olive, with the help of her son Lawrence, continued to manage the property. So I found out something about Lawrence. He is a professional motorbike stunt person. And when we went to the homestead, there's this beautiful Victorian mansion up on the hill, but there was all of these jumps and stuff out the back. And we're like, this doesn't make sense. What's going on here? It makes sense now that I understand that he was a motorbike stuntman. And he actually jumped the homestead.
No.
Yes.
Is this something I can Google?
I don't know. I haven't Googled that part, but I have heard him talk about it and I've heard his mum talk about it. So I didn't feel like I needed to fact check that part. But he was very successful, apparently, as a stuntman. From the moment the Ryans moved in, they experienced unusual occurrences. When they arrived, their pets, both a cat and a dog, refused to enter the house, fleeing. On another occasion, 3 days after I'm not sure whether they purchased the property or whether they'd moved into the property, but as they drove towards the house on dark, the house appeared fully illuminated, but when they entered, all the lights were off. The thing is, there was actually no electricity connected to this house at the time. And you could try and debunk it, saying that it was reflections from the lights of town or the lights of the car in their driveway, but all of the glass in the front of the house, all of the panes of glass had been broken by vandals. So there was actually no glass in any of the windows. So they just drove up and it all looked like it was lit up for a ball, but the minute they stepped inside, it was completely dark.
And this is the Ryan
This is the Ryan family.
couple?
So they had, I think, 3 daughters and Lawrence. I think that's correct. I'm sorry if I get that part wrong. And their children grew up in the house. I'm not sure if they were born when the Ryans bought it, but they definitely all had a whole pile of spooky experiences, which we'll talk about.
Okay, so just when you say, and you can try and debunk this.
Yes.
I will.
I do. Oh, yeah.
So this is the word of the Ryan family.
This is directly from the Ryan family, and I've heard many accounts from videos with Reg when he's been interviewed, and he was super passionate about taking people and showing them through this house. Like when you hear his story about first seeing the house and knowing that he had to have it, and I've got this listed a bit later, but we'll just throw it in here. The house remained empty for a period of time, close to 10 years, when the vandalism occurred. I think because there was issues with the inheritance side of the estate. And Reg actually bought the property but then there was legal issues surrounding it because of the infighting within the Crawley children, and had to give it back. And then he repurchased it again later at a slightly inflated price. So he was dead set.
He wanted it.
This is my house. This is where I'm going to live. This is where I'm, he was, the house was calling him, I think.
I don't think that this was
He did say in one of the interviews that I listened to that he would be the next ghost at Monte Cristo.
Oh, that's romantic.
And
yeah.
well, it is a bit. And people have thought that they have had encounters with Reg. So we are going to now look at the ghost of the Crawley family. So Christopher Crawley's ghost is said to occupy the room where he died. People maintain that he has a kind demeanour, in contrast to his wife's spirit, who dominates the house and intimidates visitors with icy presence and cold breezes. And there has been reports of feeling like they've been pushed. And you can't prove that. There are a lot of accounts, so many that I've listened to, hours and hours of YouTube footage of different people going through this place. There are books written on the paranormal encounters there. I obviously haven't been able to consume every single part of all of other people's encounters. So what I'm sticking to is what I have heard the Ryans report. So there is also reportedly ghosts of two separate maids. The two maids are linked to Christopher Crawley's illicit affairs, and they are both reported to haunt the homestead. Christopher is believed to have had a tendency to be interested in his staff members in a way in which his wife definitely wasn't. She was cruel, but he, we're hoping that he was kind if he was sleeping with his staff. But two maids reportedly were pregnant with his children. One maid was confirmed to be pregnant after her death, reportedly committed suicide by jumping from the balcony, leaving a blood stain where she died that was washed clean with bleach. The bleach has left a permanent stain on the staircase, which is the staircase at the front of the property. There have been some investigations since that time that would indicate if she leapt to her death, that it would be very unlikely that she would have landed where she landed, which has obviously fueled rumours that perhaps she didn't commit suicide and this may have actually been a murder once it was discovered that this woman was pregnant with Christopher Crawley's unborn child. The second maid bore a son named Harold. And if you thought that bit was yuck, wait till you get here. Harold suffered a debilitating head injury after an accident with either a carriage or a coach where he was hit and disfigured, and his brain injury caused a severe intellectual disability. After Harold's recovery, his disposition severely changed, and it's reported that he became extremely agitated and was prone to disturbing and volatile behaviour, which we know now is not at all uncommon after a severe brain injury, but back in those days, people were institutionalised for very strange things, and this definitely would have been a case of, this young boy needs to go to an institution. So I wonder if the mother's intentions for what I'm about to tell you was to keep him close so that she could care for him. There wouldn't have been many choices for a single mother at that time with a disabled son who needed to work. So Harold was kept chained in her quarters. The chain is still there. There's a hole in the wall that the chain runs through, so he could be taken outside and chained up when she was at work, and then he could be moved inside of an evening and slept inside with her. Harold was often mocked by local children, and so he would imitate the animal noises and would often growl and make strange sounds. I think he possibly would now be classed as nonverbal after a brain injury, but I don't know how much that was understood back then. So as kids visited and passed the property, they would hear these noises, and it became a bit of a story within the town about the monster that was chained up. And I believe that the kids, it was a bit of a thing to see if you could go up and see the monster at the homestead. All in all, his life was pretty rough. After Elizabeth's death, Harold's mother was permitted to stay on as a caretaker, which again would indicate to me that that was her son's home and she wanted to keep things, you know, as they had been for him, and he was moving into adulthood by this time. So she stayed on as the caretaker, and somewhere in the years following the departure, before the property went to rack and ruin, it was reported to police that the people in the town hadn't seen her for several days. So they sent some officers to the property to check on her, and they found her passed away from natural causes in her bed. But Harold was still chained in the room and had not had food or water, possibly for several days or a week, and was not in a great condition. He survived, but was very soon after taken to an institution where he died not long after. Harold's ghost is reported a lot, with people hearing chains and things moving around the property of a night. And when you think about the trauma that he endured, it would make sense that he would, you know, that his spirit might be stuck there. That was a tough one. I struggled trying to learn about that and get as much information as I could. It's a very, very sad story. Here's another one. The coach house is reportedly haunted by the spirit of Morris, who was a young stable boy. One day, Morris was unwell and had made the choice to stay in bed because he was feeling so poorly. His master come in to check and find out where he was, and when Morris said, "Sir, I'm too sick to be able to work," as a way to teach him a lesson, he set fire to his mattress. It went up quickly and Morris was severely burnt. I don't have confirmation of whether he died instantly at the property or whether he succumbed to infection of the burns later. I've heard differing reports for both, but regardless, that is extremely brutal and a horrible way for a young boy to die.
Who was his master?
It wasn't Christopher Crawley, so it was somebody who was employed to take care of the stables and the horses.
And how old was he?
Morris, I don't know his exact age. A young boy is the most that I know. Now we come to the ghost of Ethel Crawley. Ethel, I'm going to say, was Christopher and Elizabeth's granddaughter. In lots of reports, she is said to be their daughter, but I cannot find any evidence that they had a daughter called Ethel. It doesn't mean that it's not true, and you'll understand a bit more about that in a minute, but their son, Alphonse, definitely had a daughter called Ethel who was born in 1917, and she passed away in 1917 at 10 months old. So I'm wondering if this story is about their granddaughter and not their daughter. So Ethel was being carried by the nanny.
I don't want to hear this.
And at the top of the stairs, the nanny dropped Ethel and she fell down the stairs to her death. She was 10 months old at the time, and when the nanny was questioned after Ethel's death was confirmed, she reported that she was pushed by an unseen hand. So that ties in nice to the spooky tales, but I've kind of developed my own theory as I've gone through this. Parts of it could be wrong, and this is why I'm desperate to get to Junee so I can figure this stuff out, because this rabbit hole is deep. Visitors often report feelings of being pushed or touched by a cold small hand on the staircase, and particularly children who visit the home become upset and irritable in this area. I have also heard what I'm going to say is an exceptionally reliable account of a medium who was at the bottom of the stairs, and she had a little girl appear next to her and ask her if she could hold her hand while she walked up the stairs. The lady took her hand, took her to the top of the stairs where she vanished. She was quite shook by this experience. They do talk about the fact that Ethel was only 10 months old, and that the ghost or the apparition in this case was definitely older than that and was able to talk and walk up the stairs. At the time that they talk about this, they mention a spirit called Magdalena, and I haven't been able to find any more information, and I have desperately been trying to find out about who Magdalena is. Again, I think it's going to be a trip to Junee to be able to get to the bottom of this. The last famous ghost is the ghost of Jack Simpson. Jack was one of the last caretakers of the homestead, and he was shot to death on the porch in 1960 by a young man who reportedly was influenced by the film Psycho, which, if you think about it, house on the hill looking over town, it's got some similar vibes. Some reports say he watched it 3 times in a day, but back in 1960, we didn't have VCRs then. You'd have to go to the cinema to see a film, surely, wouldn't you, in 1960?
I feel like that's a Sue question.
It's probably just a Google question that I could solve very easily, but yes, so apparently he was inspired by Psycho, and he engraved on the back of the door, "Die Jack, haha," and that engraving is still there. You can see it. There's photos of it online. That's the last of the main famous stories. But through my research, there's been quite a few things that I've come across. The first is the reports that Christopher Crawley was this amazing, kind, beautiful man. Let's firstly think about the staunch Roman Catholic background. We definitely know that about Elizabeth, and I'm assuming that his beliefs would have been in line because they likely wouldn't have married in that time if they had differing beliefs. There's a really interesting article on a website called You, Me and Junee, and it talks about the time that the land was first purchased in Junee and about the difference between Christopher Crawley and George Dobbins, who were the 2 men who purchased the large parcels of land. Now, I believe I don't quite understand the settlers' law. I need to do more research because it's going to come up and up like over and over again through different stories when we're focusing on this time. But I believe they purchase it at a lesser price, and the idea is that then that attracts people to then purchase parcels of land from the land owner for a semi-reasonable price, with the intent that those people will improve upon that land, so farm it. And this way we're setting up little townships all over Australia at that point where there's agriculture happening, and this is a way for people to be able to purchase affordable land that they can then set up. So in this article, it talks a lot about how civically minded George Dobbins was, He was the man who owned the store. Remember, I said that there was only the store and the railway hotel. So Crawley owned the hotel and Dobbins owned the store. Dobbins added a bakery and a post office and a bank. He had bought 40 acres south of the official village to be developed, and he sold off a lot of his land, whereas Christopher is reported to have hung on to his land and not really adhered to what the laws were at the time, where you were supposed to subdivide that and sell it so you could create a town. He hung on to it for quite a period of time so then he could sell it at inflated prices. He did definitely donate a parcel of his land for the church to be built on. But this article was really interesting because everywhere else Christopher is reported to be this really kind, stately gentleman, very involved with the church, seemed to be community-minded, was inviting people to his beautiful homestead and hosting balls and sporting games and things. So that was just an interesting little tidbit, I thought, that kind of showed a different side. And then when you put that together with the fact that he was sleeping with his maids, I don't know, I just feel like it creates a bit of a different picture. He was employing people who set children's beds on fire. Like, these are the questions that I want to answer. I want to know whether that man lost his job. That's what I really want to know. I want to know if he was marched out of there. I'm assuming he was never charged. I couldn't find any Trove articles to say that he had been dismissed from his job or anything like that. So I'd really like to know. Once I started delving into ancestry and then I started sending these questions to Mum because I have to go to work and I can't spend all day on the internet. So I was shooting these questions at Mum saying, can you fact check this for me? Can you find a document? Because Ancestry is amazing. You can find all sorts of stuff. At the time of Christopher's death, he had 7 surviving children. But I have found birth registries for at least 10. They were married in September 1862. Their first son, Christopher M. Crawley, was born in 1862. There was no death date for him at all. So they were married in the September and he was born the same year, which would indicate that it was possible that she may have been pregnant at the time of
marriage.
Helena Lillian Anne was next in 1863, Mervyn Marmaduke in 1865, Aubrey Clarence in 1866, William H., we don't have a middle name, was born in 1868 and died in 1871. So he was 3 years old when he passed away. Mildred Clarissa was born in 1870 and there's no date of death for her and she is not listed as Christopher's child at his time of death. So I'm assuming that she had passed away prior to him as well. Lydia Blanche, Alphonse Hilary, Florence Angela, and Angela Christina. So they're the children, and the names don't really matter, but they are the children that I could find actual physical evidence with birth records for that family. All of these children were born prior to Monte Cristo being built. So I'm not sure what year the slab hut was built in, but at some point, maybe it was so they had the slab hut, then they built the brick homestead, and then Monte Cristo was built. So at some point, she was living with some of these kids in a slab hut, and then they moved to their brick homestead. But when you see the brick homestead, I think it may have become the kitchen area or servants' quarters. It wasn't, the brick homestead wasn't the same as what Monte Cristo is. It was just a, nice brick home, which if you did have 7 or possibly 10, it was 1878 when Christopher purchased the hotel. So prior to that, here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So prior to him purchasing the hotel, it is reported that they were quite poor and they lived in a bark hut and there were 7 children in a bark hut. No wonder it was hard to feed them when he was a farmer at that point. I'm just going to quickly touch, now that I've learned all about that, and I mentioned Magdalena earlier, who is another name that has popped up, but I haven't been able to confirm or deny her existence. I definitely know that Ethel was Alphonse Hilary's daughter. Alphonse also married an Ethel. Now, this part, I can't. This is the tricky bit, and this is the bit where I got deep into the rabbit hole, because you could start to see a pattern form. A lovely, religious, God-fearing Mrs. Crawley, whose husband was diddling his staff. We have a reported suicide, but quite possible murder off the top floor balcony of a woman who is pregnant with Christopher Crawley's child. We have Harold, reportedly Christopher Crawley's child, who was hit by a carriage and then chained up in the quarters of his mother. So he was clearly not recognised as one of the children of the family. He was hidden away. And I don't know the details of the carriage accident, but I'm assuming that Mrs. Crawley possibly had a carriage. This is just my speculation. There is no evidence of this anywhere. But then when I started looking for Ethel and a child named Ethel that belonged to Christopher and Elizabeth and could not find one, but found Ethel, and the date seems to fit, the 1917 January to November, something popped up early in my research where Christopher William Crawley was linked to a woman named Elizabeth Bowles. And at the time, I just was like, oh, this website's got this wrong, and just ignored it. Like, okay, this isn't a reputable website because he was married to Elizabeth Lydia Carr. As I went on and started looking into all of this and was looking for Ethel, I found 2 different ancestry pages for Alphonse Hilary. Well, actually, Mum found them. 2 different family trees for Alphonse Hilary. Both have the same birth date and same date of death. Both state that he was born in Balmain and died in Junee. So I thought that was odd, that he was born in Balmain when the family lived in Junee. Doesn't mean that they weren't on a trip or something when he was born. But on the second page, Elizabeth Bowles was listed as his mother. That name clicked straight away because I had found this previous website that had listed Elizabeth Bowles as William Crawley's wife, which was definitely not true. He was never married to Elizabeth Bowles. So all I know about Elizabeth Bowles is that she was born in 1865 and died in 1933. I can't find any more information about her whatsoever. But in relation to Ethel, when I was talking about this pattern forming in my brain with the maid and Harold, if Ethel was the baby who the nanny dropped down the stairs after being pushed by an unseen hand that everybody is assuming was a ghost because this house is super, super haunted. But what if it wasn't a ghost? What if that was her illegitimate granddaughter? Again, it's all just speculation. This is just a little pattern that's been forming in my mind.
It's probably more likely it wasn't a ghost, just speaking from my experience of limited paranormal beliefs.
Yes. And by all reports, Mrs. Crawley ruled her staff with an iron fist. She was cruel and unkind and she mistreated them. So do you think as a nanny who had just dropped a baby down the stairs and caused its death, would you go to the police and say, my employer pushed me? Or would you say I felt like I might have been pushed, or she wasn't injured, but the baby died? Would you implicate your employer?
I think if I was going to make a story up, it wouldn't be that I was pushed by an unseen hand.
Well, that's right. But maybe she's just saying I was pushed by an unseen hand. Maybe she's not talking about a ghost. Maybe she just is saying I was pushed and I felt myself being pushed, but I didn't see the person who pushed me. And that then fits in when you've got a homestead full of ghosts. When you read that report and you say, oh, she was pushed by an unseen hand, maybe that was her way of not actually having to say the name of the person who pushed her. That pattern started to form. And then when I found this thing, it's quite possible that Elizabeth Crawley was Alphonse's mother and Ethel was not the child of an illegitimate son to her, or not illegitimate. Well, it would be a stepson, wouldn't it, if she wasn't his mother, but her husband was the father. Anyway, we're getting far, far too complicated. But this is just the little rabbit hole that I found myself down. There's still lots of hints and things. So we're going to continue to work on this, and if I find out anything great, I'll let you know. But there is likely going to be a trip to Junee in the very, very near future. So,
Shannon, I am a little bit behind in the editing process, so I'll give you next week off if you would like to go to Junee.
Thank you.
But I feel so sorry for the person whose tour you will find yourself on.
It's a self-guided tour.
Oh.
So unless you book yourself into the ghost tour, which I believe you have to book in months in advance to be able to get into one of those, which is unlikely.
I mean, if you're going to go to Junee, you have to do that.
Yeah. I think it also involves sleeping over in the house.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sue, are you going with her?
Oh, Mum would be up for it.
I am not.
Yeah, she would be totally up for it. There's a reason that I'm a weirdo, and it's because she's a weirdo. It's very hard when you're looking at paranormal information to know what is historically accurate and what has been, beefed up a little bit to suit the story. But there is a lot of evidence, and Reg Ryan did not buy this home with the idea of I'm going to turn it into a museum and do paranormal tours. He bought it as a place for him and his family to live. So I feel very confident in the information that they have supplied, and I feel exceptionally confident about the people who have passed on knowledge. There were some that I didn't, but the parts that I've shared today, outside of my own speculation, which is just speculation, that those people had a respect for Reg. It is very easy. If you watch any of the videos where Reg is interviewed or is the person giving the tour, you can see this man's passion. And here is Olive in her 90s, still living in the homestead. She said many years ago that once Reg had passed that she would move into a unit in town, but she hasn't. She's stayed there. And she said that living there is just like living with another family. You just can't see them. So there's a whole pile of stuff, and I haven't got into it. I did put a trigger warning at the beginning about the animal brutality, and I haven't touched on it. And it's just because it makes me feel a bit particularly sick.
Knowing what you've already shared in this story, it must be bad. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's not great. But it's super widely known knowledge. So if you want to go and have a look at that, the Ryans had a whole pile of bad luck with animals on that property. It was all kinds of animals, and it was their children's pets. And there's some yuck stuff there. So I'm going to tell you that it exists, and if you would like to have a look at it, feel free. Just jump online. You'll find it anywhere. I want to thank Reg for restoring this beautiful home, even though he's not here. I just hope while we're talking about paranormal stuff, if I can just put that out into the universe, because none of this would have been possible without his passion for this home. And this home is beautiful. It is a sight to behold. So I'm so excited to go and get inside and have a look at the work that he did. And Olive states that he did all of the work apart from the carpeting and the wallpaper. So, and it was a shell. There's some images online that you can see how badly that it was vandalised in the time that it was left vacant. While we're talking about it being vacant, did I mention before it was because there was some infighting with the family? I'm just going to add this before I wrap up. I did find Elizabeth Crawley's will, like an actual copy of her last will and testament. When you look at it, it's probably not abnormal that there would be fighting so I won't list the names because there's descendants of these people still living now, but she appointed 2 executors, and those 2 executors were both the full beneficiaries. At the time of her death in 1933, William, who was the child that died at 3, and we don't have a death date for Mildred and Clarissa, but it appears that the 7 children that are listed as their children on Find a Grave and in Ancestry were all still alive at the time of her death, but only 2 children were listed as beneficiaries in her will. So it did provide me with a little bit of, yep, I can see why when Reg said, that he'd purchased the house and then that fell through and then he had to repurchase it again later because of issues and legalities with the family. That did make a lot of sense to me once I had read her will.
So nothing like the will couldn't possibly have been written when only 2 children were born?
I know, because they were on the younger scale of her children.
Oh.
And they were both daughters, which I thought was very unusual for the time.
I'm just thinking about my own will right now, and I think I only have 1 child on it. But that's because the second wasn't born yet.
Yes, no, these were and I did think, okay, well, if these are, down the bottom end of the 7 children, it's not the 2 youngest, but if these are down the bottom end, like maybe that makes sense because they're younger and they would be around to take care, and she might be thinking that they might want to live there and that's why she's made them beneficiaries. I did think it was interesting. Yeah.
You want to put a call out if anyone knows anything?
Yes. If anybody knows anything, please contact us.
Have you slept this week, Shannon?
Not much. Not much at all. I did try and go to bed really early last night so I wasn't strung out today and I could come in and give you a really straight line story, Megan.
How'd you go with that?
Nah. If you are as interested in this homestead as I am, ghost tours and group tours must be booked in advance, but no bookings are required for self-guided tours. The homestead is open for the self-guided tours from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, as well as public holidays. And for more information, you can visit the website at www.montecristo.com.au. If you're going to head there, you might see me there somewhere, because it's on the agenda. So there quite possibly could be a part 2 to this episode, so I can just wrap it all up if I can pop it all in a nice little box with a neat and tidy bow.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of If These Trees Could Talk. If you would like to access more about the places or information included in today's topic, please visit our website, ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. If you would like to follow us on our adventures, check us out on Facebook or Insta. Our creative writer is Shannon Walters, and our podcast is produced at Bellevue Studio in the Hunter Valley with audio production by Megan Anderson. We love to hear your feedback, so please rate and review, and if you would like to hear more, please subscribe. We look forward to you joining us for our next adventure.